The Vatican city-state stands as the world's smallest independent nation, occupying just 44 hectares in the heart of Rome. But beneath the spiritual authority of the Pope and the marble facades of St. Peter's Basilica lies something far less visible, a vast financial empire that manages billions of euros in assets. This is the story of how the Catholic Church built one of the most complex, secretive, and controversial banking systems on earth. When most people think of the Vatican, they envision popes, cardinals, religious ceremonies, and centuries of spiritual tradition. Few realize that the Holy See operates a sophisticated financial apparatus rivaling many nation-states. This financial empire includes banks, investment portfolios, real estate holdings across multiple continents, and a treasury system that has weathered crises, scandals, and transformations across centuries. The Vatican's banking world exists in a curious liminal space, neither fully transparent like a modern bank, nor as secretive as it once was. It operates under rules that blend Vatican law, international standards, and the unique authority of the Pope himself. To understand the Vatican's financial empire requires understanding how an institution founded on faith became one of history's most sophisticated wealth management operations. The story of Vatican finances traces back much further than many assume. In 1870, when Italian forces united the peninsula and absorbed the Papal States, the Pope lost not just territory, they lost their temporal power and the vast wealth that came with it. Overnight, the papacy transformed from a political superpower controlling large territories in central Italy to a prisoner locked away in the Vatican. But within that loss lay an opportunity for financial innovation. The Vatican needed a new way to manage the resources flowing in from Catholics worldwide, charitable donations, and whatever investments the Church could protect. What emerged was a patchwork of financial mechanisms designed to do one thing: secure the Church's independence and ensure the Pope's autonomy from outside political pressure. The formal creation of the Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, or IOR, came in 1942 under Pope Pius XII, but this was not the beginning. The roots run much deeper. A commission called Ad Pius Causas was established back in 1887 by Pope Leo XIII, specifically to handle donations and bequests intended for religious works. This secret commission met in an office nicknamed the Black Hole because it had once housed the censorship bureau of the Papal State. By a certain irony, it was also where a brilliant poet named Gioacchino Belli had worked, a man known for writing irreverent sonnets mocking papal authority. The Vatican's financial structures were deliberately designed to be opaque. During World War II, when Nazi forces occupied Rome between 1943 and 1944, the Vatican's extraterritorial status and financial independence allowed it to shelter thousands of Jews and political refugees. The money management systems enabled this humanitarian work to happen outside the reach of the occupation authorities. By the mid-20th century, the Vatican had accumulated a remarkable portfolio. Conservative estimates from financial analysts placed Vatican wealth at between $10 and $15 billion. Italian stock holdings alone represented $1.6 billion, approximately 15% of all listed shares on the Italian market at that time. The Church had strategic investments in banking, insurance, chemicals, steel, construction, and real estate across Europe and beyond. This was not done haphazardly. Under Pope Pius XII, Vatican money was shrewdly invested in stocks and real estate, and the capital multiplied manyfold. The Church applied the same principles of diversification and strategic asset allocation that any sophisticated investor might use, except the Church did not face the normal tax burden that constrained ordinary investors. The Lateran Treaty of 1929, signed between Pope Pius XI and Mussolini, established Vatican City's sovereignty and included provisions recognizing the Church's financial independence. Italy agreed to pay the Pope $39 million in cash and $52 million in government bonds as compensation for losses suffered when the Papal States were absorbed into Italy in 1870. This settlement became the foundation for Vatican financial autonomy. By the 1960s, Vatican officials realized they could not simply let these assets sit idle. The Church needed professional financial management. This realization set the stage for decisions that would ultimately lead to both tremendous success and spectacular failure. In the 1960s, the Vatican hired a financial advisor named Michele Sindona to help manage its growing portfolio. Sindona presented himself as a brilliant financier, a self-made businessman who had climbed Italy's corporate ladder. But investigations later revealed something far more sinister. Sindona had questionable associations with the Mafia and with a secret Masonic lodge called P2, which the Italian Parliament classified as a subversive organization. In 1974, Sindona's Franklin National Bank collapsed spectacularly. The Vatican had channeled part of its investments through Sindona's financial empire, and when it crumbled, the Holy See experienced losses estimated at 35 billion Italian lire, roughly £20 million sterling. It was a humiliating and expensive lesson. The Vatican's financial dealings had inadvertently become entangled with organized crime. But if the Franklin Bank scandal was a cautionary tale, what came next would be far more explosive. The 1980s brought the Banco Ambrosiano affair, a financial catastrophe that would define Vatican banking for decades to come and create enduring questions about the institution's judgment and ethics. Roberto Calvi was known as God's banker because of his intimate financial ties to the Vatican. As general manager and later chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, one of Italy's largest banks, Calvi had built a close relationship with Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, who served as president of the Vatican Bank from 1971 to 1989. Their relationship was not merely professional. It was the foundation of an intricate financial arrangement that would eventually cause catastrophic losses. Banco Ambrosiano was no ordinary bank. Under Calvi's direction, it funneled money to various interests worldwide. The Vatican Bank was its main shareholder. Ambrosiano provided funds for political parties in Italy, supported both the Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua and its Sandinista opposition, allegedly funded the Polish trade union Solidarity, which would help bring down Soviet communism, and maintained an elaborate offshore system with shell companies in Nassau, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. The complexity was intentional. Calvi had constructed an offshore structure specifically designed to obscure the flow of money and the true ownership of assets. Vatican officials were deeply involved in this system, though they maintained plausible deniability about the true nature of the operations. In 1982, the structure collapsed. Banco Ambrosiano could not account for $1.287 billion in liabilities. Calvi fled the country on a false passport. Within weeks, he was found dead on Blackfriars Bridge in London, hanging from scaffolding in one of history's most mysterious deaths. Some conspiracy theorists suggested the Vatican had him killed to protect its secrets. Others pointed to the Mafia. Others speculated about intelligence agencies. The truth remains contested, but one fact is certain. Calvi died under highly suspicious circumstances, and the Vatican's financial involvement in Ambrosiano unraveled publicly. The Vatican's response to the Banco Ambrosiano collapse was telling. Rather than conduct a thorough, transparent investigation, Church officials engaged in damage control. Pope John Paul II pledged full transparency regarding the bank's links to the Vatican and brought in lay bankers to help manage the fallout. However, complete transparency never materialized. Significantly, the Holy See agreed to pay out a substantial sum to cover losses from Ambrosiano's offshore companies without accepting liability. They paid the price of the disaster without admitting guilt. This approach allowed the Vatican to move on from the scandal while maintaining the fiction that nothing fundamentally wrong had occurred within Vatican financial structures. Archbishop Marcinkus, who had overseen the darkest period in Vatican bank history, never faced criminal prosecution despite his central role. He was quietly reassigned and eventually retired. The Vatican had learned an important lesson. When crises emerged, the institution would weather them through settlement, restructuring, and by keeping potentially embarrassing details hidden from public view. For decades afterward, the Vatican Bank remained, in the words of financial analysts, a byword for scandal, corruption, and conspiracy theories. The suspicions were not entirely unfounded. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, various investigations continued to uncover questionable dealings, including the controversial Ustasha Treasury affair, an ugly episode involving treasure looted by Croatian Nazis during World War II, which allegedly passed through Vatican accounts. The 21st century brought new pressures on Vatican finances. As the global financial system tightened around anti-money laundering regulations and international banking standards became mandatory for all institutions, the Vatican found itself unable to hide in the shadows. Banking relationships with major institutions became contingent on compliance with international standards. In September 2010, Italian magistrates seized 23 million euros from the IOR, alleging violations of anti-money laundering laws. The money had been in transit from an Italian bank to JP Morgan Chase. The IOR was attempting to move funds without providing adequate documentation about their origin and destination. It was the kind of transaction that would have gone unnoticed in previous decades. In the modern regulatory environment, it triggered immediate seizure and investigation. Officials at the Vatican Bank, including President Ettore Gotti Tedeschi, were placed under investigation for money laundering charges. The scandal threatened to isolate the Vatican from the legitimate global banking system. If major banks would not work with the Vatican, the Church's ability to manage its worldwide operations would collapse. The Vatican released the seized funds in May 2011, apparently in acknowledgement of steps taken to conform the institute to international standards. But the message was clear. The old ways of operating were finished. The Vatican would have to genuinely reform or face increasing international isolation. When Pope Francis took office in 2013, cleaning up Vatican finances became a central priority. Francis understood that the Church's credibility was bound to its financial ethics. He could not preach about the poor while presiding over a financial empire shrouded in secrecy and corruption. Francis implemented sweeping reforms. He established the Secretariat for the Economy and the Council for the Economy, creating centralized oversight of financial operations. He created the Financial Information Authority, now called ASIF, a dedicated financial intelligence unit designed to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. He issued comprehensive laws, statutes, and procedures designed to bring Vatican structures in line with international banking standards. He even established the Pontifical Commission to study and oversee reforms of the Vatican Bank specifically. Most radically, Francis changed Vatican banking culture itself. The IOR, under its new leadership, began publishing annual financial reports for public scrutiny, something virtually unimaginable before. The Vatican joined international organizations like Moneyval, the Council of Europe's Committee for Assessing Compliance with Anti-Money Laundering Standards. Vatican employees received mandatory training on financial compliance and ethical conduct. The IOR implemented suspicious transaction reporting and currency transaction reporting, procedures mirroring those of legitimate international banks. The reforms were not merely cosmetic. The Vatican brought in Jean-Baptiste de François, a former CEO of the investment firm Invesco, to lead the Vatican Bank. Under his direction, the IOR transformed from an opaque institution into something approaching legitimate international banking practices. By 2024, ASIF recorded a 1/3 reduction in suspicious financial activity reports at the Vatican. International evaluators recognize substantial improvements in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing. But even as Francis attempted to reform the system, endemic problems persisted. In 2020, Cardinal Angelo Becciu, once considered a possible papal successor himself and one of the most powerful officials in the Church, was forced to resign amid allegations of financial misconduct. The Vatican launched an investigation that would lead to what observers called the trial of the century, the first ever criminal prosecution of a cardinal in Vatican history. The trial, which began in 2021 and ran for 85 hearings over 2.5 years, centered on a catastrophically mismanaged London property investment. In 2014, when Becciu held the number 2 position in the Secretariat of State, the Vatican's key administrative and diplomatic department, he orchestrated an investment of €350 million into a fund managed by Italian financier Raffaele Mincione. The fund was supposed to purchase and develop a luxury building on Sloane Avenue in Chelsea, one of London's most exclusive neighborhoods. The deal was structured with Byzantine complexity. The Vatican invested roughly €200 million, acquiring about 45% of the building through offshore shell companies and convoluted financial arrangements. When concerns emerged about losses and mismanagement, Becciu's successor brought in another financier, Gianluigi Torzi, to extract the Vatican from the situation. The final buyout deal cost tens of millions of euros more than anticipated. When the property was finally sold in 2022, the Vatican took a loss of more than €100 million. What made this worse was not merely the financial failure. Prosecutors alleged that Vatican officials and financial brokers had systematically enriched themselves at the Church's expense, taking millions in commissions and fees while the Vatican hemorrhaged money. The investigation revealed vendettas, espionage, ransom payments to Islamic militants in Mali, suspicious payments to a woman described as a security consultant, and donations of Vatican money to charities run by senior officials' family members. In December 2023, a Vatican tribunal convicted Cardinal Becciu of embezzlement and aggravated fraud, sentencing him to 5.5 years in prison. He was also banned from public office for life. While Becciu maintained his innocence and announced plans to appeal, the conviction was historically significant. No cardinal had ever been prosecuted in the Vatican's criminal court before. The trial's revelations shocked Catholics worldwide. Testimony and documents showed that the Vatican's top leaders had been either negligent or complicit in allowing massive financial mismanagement. Some of Becciu's actions appeared almost grotesquely self-serving, such as sending €125,000 of Vatican money to a charity run by his brother in Sardinia, including a donation supposedly earmarked for feeding the poor that investigators determined was funded through forged receipts for bread deliveries that never occurred. The tribunal ordered the confiscation of more than €180 million from the defendants and payment of €200 million in civil damages to Vatican offices. But the real damage was reputational. The trial was meant to demonstrate that Pope Francis was serious about reform and accountability. Instead, it revealed the depths to which Vatican financial management had sunk. That powerful cardinals could misappropriate hundreds of millions of euros with relatively little oversight until years of damage had accumulated. Today, the Vatican Bank operates as a far different institution than it did in the 1980s and 1990s. The IOR holds over €5 billion in financial assets and manages them according to principles designed to align with Catholic social teaching. Unlike commercial banks, the IOR does not seek to maximize profits. It does not make loans in the traditional sense. Its focus is on managing funds for religious organizations, charitable institutions, and the Church's worldwide operations. The administration of the patrimony of the Apostolic See, APSA, created by Pope Paul VI in 1967 and reformed under Pope Francis, now operates with unprecedented transparency for a Vatican institution. APSA manages 4,234 real estate properties in Italy and an additional 1,200 properties in London, Paris, Geneva, and Lausanne. While only about 20% of these properties are rented at fair market value, and many house Vatican offices or are rented at reduced rates to employees, the organization reported a profit of €62.2 million in 2024, one of the highest figures in recent years. Vatican financial institutions now publish annual reports for public review. They employ compliance officers trained in international banking standards. They report suspicious transactions to financial authorities. They participate in international forums designed to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. The Vatican joined SEPA, the Single Euro Payments Area, enabling transparent electronic payments. The organization even issues Visa debit cards and accepts international payment methods. Yet despite the reforms, questions persist. The Vatican's financial structure remains uniquely opaque in certain respects. Religious orders, dioceses, and church-affiliated entities worldwide maintain separate financial arrangements that are not always subject to the same transparency requirements as the central Vatican apparatus. Money flows through the system in ways that are not always fully tracked or disclosed. The Secretariat of State, the Vatican's most powerful administrative body, had to be stripped of direct control over investment funds after the Becciu scandal. The organization had been making massive financial decisions with insufficient oversight. Pope Francis removed the Secretariat's investment authority and consolidated control under APSA, where oversight is theoretically more stringent. Peter's Pence, the donations that Catholics contribute specifically to fund the Pope's charitable work and Vatican operations, remains a source of fascination and occasional controversy. Catholics contribute hundreds of millions of euros annually through this channel, but exactly how the money is used is not always transparent. When donations declined sharply in recent years, reportedly due to declining Catholic membership and church credibility issues, the Vatican faced genuine budget pressures. The broader question remains: can a 1,000-year-old institution, built on centuries of secrecy and operating under laws written by its own supreme leader, ever achieve the transparency and accountability expected of modern financial institutions? The Vatican's banking empire represents a kind of financial anomaly in the modern world. It operates as a sovereign state with supreme legislative, executive, and judicial authority held by a single individual, the Pope. This concentration of power means that accountability to external authorities is limited. Even when reforms are implemented, they can be reversed by the next pontiff, as happened with some regulatory changes after Pope Benedict XVI's brief tenure. The Vatican's investment strategy traditionally favored conservative choices concentrated within Europe and the Western world, though recent popes have encouraged investments in developing regions. The Church invests in sectors it considers aligned with Catholic values, which means avoiding weapons manufacturers, gambling operations, and companies violating Catholic social teaching. But defining exactly what violates Catholic principles remains contested. The financial world has learned that the Vatican operates according to its own logic, shaped by centuries of history, theological principles, and political pragmatism. The scandals, reforms, transparency initiatives, and ongoing structural challenges reflect the tension between an institution founded on spiritual principles and one that must operate in the material world as a sovereign state with billions in assets.